Good evening from the Kingdom of Bahrain. I will be discussing Chapter 2 in The Faith and Founders of American Republic by Mark David Hall and Demian L. Dreisbach. The chapter is titled Vindiciae, Contra, Tyrannos, the Influence of the Reformed Tradition in American Founding. In this chapter, the authors speak how historians neglect that Christianity played an integral role in the founding of the Republic. They focus more on a rational approach following famous persons like Thomas Jefferson, James Madison, George Washington, that were not born in America and therefore not representative of the Reformation that happened here. During the time of the founding, 3/4 of the population were connected with traditions like Presbyterian and Calvinist churches. What is Reformed political theory? Reformed churches believed that humans were created in the image of God. Men and women are sinful, and God has established institutions for various purposes. For example, the family, the church, and the state. Another covenant they believe in is that authority is ordained by God with a biblical obligation to obey. Romans chapter 13, verse 1 through 2. Important persons in the Reformation movement were John Calvin, Martin Luther, John Winthrop, and Samuel Rutherford. The Reformation was a widespread movement opposed to the abuses by the Roman Catholic Church. They also believed that the individual is responsible for the role between God and themselves, and that they do not need an intermediary, unlike the Roman Catholic Church, who believed that priests were ordained by God to be the intermediary between God and themselves. The Reformation led to widespread literacy in the translating and printing of the Bible, which undermined the existing hierarchies and nurtured the desire for a self-government. They believe that God is sovereign over all creation. Many thinkers stated that inferior magistrates should resist unjust rulers and should permit, if not require, their citizens to do so. The most famous publication of the Reformation is written by Stephanus Junius Brutus, who wrote Vindiciae contra Tyrannos. In this manuscript, he stated that men exist in a state of natural liberty, and that natural law teaches us to preserve and protect our life and liberty. He also said that humans are free by nature and impatient by servitude. In this writing, he created a twofold covenant for a legitimate government. The first covenant was that people and ruler must obey God. If they do not obey God, they are no longer legitimate. The second covenant is that the consent of the people is necessary for the government to be legitimate, and we can find this in many of the teachings of our founders. The historian Dave L. Ware wrote a book, Early New England, A Covenanted Society, and in his book he said that many of the colonies and colonists followed a set of covenants in each of their respective colonies that taught that government should be limited. And they also said that governments are legitimate and binding because they were established by the consent of the governed. The literature of this time was reformative in nature. Many of the publications were printed by the Calvinist idealists. Some historians will say that the people at the time of the independence were unchurched, meaning that they were not members of a church. Others claim that this is because of a lack of ability to attend church. The people that say that colonists were unchurched say that only 10% of the people went to church, and therefore the founding was not founded based on religion. While the others that claim that is because of their lack of attendance say that 56 to 80% were churched based on their ideologies. And most of these ideologies were based on the Reformation. I'm now going to talk about 3 of the most important founding documents of our nation's history, the first of which is the Declaration of Independence. During the time that the Declaration of Independence was written, it was in response to what most historians would say to the Stamp Act crisis. where the British government threatened to send ecclesiastical government over to rule over us. Well, the Puritan Reformed were scared of ecclesiastical rule, and the pressure from the Church of England did not help. After the Stamp Act, they enacted to further this pressure, they enacted the Quebec Act, which gave French Catholics a lot of land in the middle of America. This caused Puritans to worry that the Catholic Church will once again come to rule over them. In the writing of the Declaration of Independence, Thomas Jefferson used much of the language used in the Reformation literature. We can also see some of this language in the writing of the Constitution, where the writers believed that humans were sinful and that it was dangerous to concentrate political power, and thus created the checks and balances we see in the Constitution. One note to make is that religion is not mentioned because many of them felt that to recognize one religion would give too much power to that particular religion and not to the others of the time. This can also be seen in the writing of the First Amendment. They did not name a religion because they did not want the federal government to recognize one religion to power over all of the others. In conclusion, you can see that many of the language, much of the ideologies of the Reformation are present in the founding of our nation, and therefore should be recognized as such.